based on a climate change agenda that absolutely is a hoax because it has nothing to do with the climate. The only person in this race who can tell you that Ron McDaniel needs to step aside after 5 failed years of leadership in our own party, because if we can't hold accountability in our own party, we could never bring it to the federal government. The only person to tell you that I will pardon on day one every peaceful January 6th protester, because that's the right thing to do for this country. And I want to ask you, why am I the only candidate who can tell you these things? It's because our politics is corrupt. Every politician is dancing to the tune of their biggest donor. You heard that from Steve King before about the pipeline. Well, you know what? In my case, that biggest donor is me. I don't report to them. I report to you, the citizens of this country. I'm not somebody's circus monkey, somebody's pawn on a chessboard. That's what our politics has become. Frankly, I would rather speak the truth and lose this election than to win by playing some fake game of political snakes and ladders. But the bet I'm making is that is the winning strategy. That we trust the people, not to be sheep, to swallow what we're force-fed by the super PACs and the advertisements they've been flooding you with on television. No, that's not how we're doing it. I'm not bowing down to some overlord that just wants me to enact their own policies so they're able to line their own pockets. That's what's happening. Even the ones who pretend to be anti-establishment, that's how they're doing it. You want a real outsider, you got it standing right here in front of you right now. A patriot who speaks the truth. And if you want somebody who's going to speak truth to power, vote for the candidate who's going to speak the truth to you. God is real. There are 2 genders. Fossil fuels are a requirement for human prosperity. Reverse racism is racism. An open border is not a border. Parents determine the education of their children. The nuclear family isn't a bad word. It's the greatest form of governance known to mankind. Capitalism isn't something we should apologize for. It's what lifts us up from poverty, not crony capitalism, but the real thing. There's 3 branches of government in the United States, not 4. And the U.S. Constitution, it is the strongest and greatest guarantor of freedom in human history. That is the truth. We fight for the truth. We stand up for the truth. That is what won us the American Revolution. That is what reunited us after the Civil War. That is what won us 2 world wars and the Cold War. That is what still gives hope to the free world. And if we can revive that dream over group identity and victimhood and grievance, then nobody in the world, not a nation, not a corporation, not a virus, not China, is going to defeat us. That is what American exceptionalism is all about. And that is what we will revive to save this great country. Thank you for coming out today, guys. God bless you and your families. And may God bless our United States of America. We will not stop until we get this job done. Tomorrow night we win the Iowa caucus, and then we win this primary and we win the general. With your help, I will deliver you a landslide. 18 months from now, I'm going to sit across the table from Xi Jinping so I can handle the hard ones. We're going to open this up and give me some of the questions you guys have in this final hour before the caucus. Every one of your votes counts as the equivalent of 1 million people. I'm going to ask you to do the right thing tomorrow night. I'm asking for your vote. But today, you get to ask me the questions. So, sir, we'll start with you, and then we'll bring it up to the front. I can use the microphone with the guys in the front, and you can use it in the back. Cool.
And to start with, God bless you.
Thank you.
I believe in what you're doing.
Thank you.
I've been thinking about this thing. There is a slim chance that you get shut out on this deal, right? So what I want to know is, as regular people who want some representation in this whole mess, right? We're not being represented at all. We work our butts off every day for a paycheck. They steal our money. They give it away. What do you think about the idea of a national labor strike? Truck drivers, people who work at 7-Eleven, the guy who was shoveling snow for a living today. What do you think if they won't hold themselves responsible, that we hold them responsible with a national labor strike where we just say we're not going to work until you get it together?
Thank you, sir. We saw some of this with the Canadian truckers. in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And you know what they did to them? They shut off their bank accounts. It's like the central bank digital currency they now want to bring to the United States of America. I feel what you feel, sir. The real dividing line in this country, we're in the middle of a war in this country. I'm going to say it in explicit terms, and I don't use that term lightly. It's not a war between black and white. It's not even really a war between Democrat and Republican. It's deeper than that. It is a war between those of us who love the United States of America and our founding ideals, and a fringe minority who hates this country and what we stand for. A war between those of us who believe we, the people, create a government accountable to us, and those who believe that it's a small group of elites in the back of palace halls that decide how we live our lives. A war between those who believe in merit and those who believe in group quotas. And I call it a war because there's no middle ground here. Either you believe one of these things or the other. There's no middle ground. That's why we're in the middle of a war for the future of our country. It's between the Great Reset and the Great Uprising. That's what's going on in this country right now. And so you're asking about the next step of the Great Uprising. That's what pulled me into this race. And so, sir, I'm here to ask you today to do the right thing. I hope we never get there. I hope we don't have to get to what the next steps look like. Our founding fathers did what they needed to do in 1776. So we could just follow what they set into motion and respect it. I think we live in a 1776 moment now. But I think we have an opportunity to do this the right way, peacefully, through our electoral process, if we're able to get this done fairly, and that starts tomorrow night at the Iowa caucus. So it is exactly the spirit. We said, what can we do to address the system that's forking over our taxpayer money, more than $34 trillion in a hole, forking that over to places like Ukraine so some kleptocrat can buy a bigger house, cutting Social Security, Medicare, and veterans benefits here at home, to write foreign aid checks to Central America, which is actually responsible for the northward flow of migrants to our own country. A tax code that's been weaponized to be able to go after people who the government disagrees with. The weaponization of government to go after political opponents just because you disagree with them. And yet if a bunch of truckers stand up in this country like they did in Canada, you're darn sure they're going to try and do the same thing right here. The answer to that is a president who understands the law and the Constitution. This is our last chance to get this right. This is 4 years from now, 5 years from now, the interest payments on our national debt are the largest line item in our federal budget. We're toast. If my kids are in high school by the time we get this right, I don't think we have a country left. But I think this is our last best moment for me to tell you, this is how you do this. And I'm not saying this out of self-interest. I'm telling you, this is why I'm in this race. I think this is our last moment to actually make sure that our country continues to exist, that we win this war for the future of our country. And so the way to do it, sir, is I don't think we're going to have to get there if we do the right thing starting tomorrow night. That's all I'm asking every one of you. It's going to be cold. George Washington did not complain about the weather when he crossed the Delaware. I promise you that. We live in a 1776 moment now. And so I'm asking you for your vote tomorrow night. And if you do your part, I promise you, my family and I, we will do ours to make sure, not in some fake politician way, but in a true way to make sure that our country's best days, including for every worker in this country, our country's best days, may actually still be ahead of us. You do your part tomorrow, I'm going to do mine. And that's the kind of strike that we need, is a strike at this caucus to say that we're done with the mainstream media's narrative and the establishment and the lies that they have force-fed you. Not only about our own movement, but even about me in this race. You want to stick it back to them. Do it tomorrow night, and we're going to get this right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. We're going right back to sir.
We're on the verge of war with China, Russia. We've got the Middle East conflict going to come up with North Korea. How do you solve that problem?
Sure. So my foreign policy is clear, and I think that the first step is clarity. The foreign policy establishment of both parties believes in what many of the so-called experts call strategic ambiguity, that we're not going to tell you what exactly we're going to do. That's how you get to World War III. World War III isn't in the interest of any country who enters it. But you accidentally cross red lines where no one knows what those are. That's how you get World War III. And I think there are some cynical forces in this country who are rooting for it, including those who stand to make money for it. I don't think that you should be allowed to start a military contracting firm after your time at the UN if you're using your connections to do it. I don't think if you're Joe Biden, Hunter Biden's son, you should be allowed to collect a $5 million bribe from Ukraine and then effectively push for those same policies to send $200 billion to that same country. So there are cynical forces in this country that stand to benefit from World War III that are marching our way straight into it. Here's my foreign policy. I'll keep us out of World War III by weakening the Russia-China alliance, and I'm happy to tell you how. I'll declare economic independence from communist China. We depend on our enemy for our modern way of life, from our pharmaceuticals to our military equipment. We'll put an end to that. That's the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson would have signed if he were alive today. And then here's the most radical one of all. Drives people nuts when I say this, but I'm going to keep my promise. We're going to use our own national defense spending to actually, foremost, defend our own homeland against the risks that we face right now, right here at home. You want to know what's going on at the southern border? It's not illegal immigration. It is an invasion. If there were 3 million Chinese on our western border or 3 million Iranians on our eastern border, we'd call that an invasion. It's no different when it's 8 million at our own southern border, many of which are actually goaded by China to actually come in here. So I think I'm going to put an end to that. Cyber attacks, super EMP attacks, missile defenses, all of which we're missing today. Make sure our national defense spending is spending our own homeland. I'll end the war in Ukraine with a reasonable deal that requires Russia to exit its military alliance with China, and in return, we will say that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. I think NATO expansionism has actually been a disaster. And any international institution that's hostile to our own sovereignty, from the WHO to the UN, I'm very open to questioning our continued involvement if these institutions have lost their way when North Korea, Iran, Venezuela are sitting on the Human Rights Council of the UN and they're effectively doing China's bidding, shackling the United States while leaving China untouched. We have to revisit a lot of the assumptions of our failed foreign policy in the past and say, how do we stand a World War III? How do we stop our dependence on our enemy for our modern way of life? I'm having a clear plan for that. And most importantly, now more than ever, protect our own borders and protect our own citizens here in this homeland. Because if what happened on October 7th can happen in Israel, here's the hard truth. It could happen right here at home in the United States of America. And if I've done my job as your next president, we will make darn sure that it doesn't. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the question. Thank you. We'll come over here to the hour and we'll keep working our way up. You want to stand up?
Hi, Mr. Ramaswamy. It's an honor. I have a question. What motivates you to include publishing the Epstein list as an aspect of your campaign? And is a part of this posture influenced by sympathy with the victims of Jeffrey Epstein? Thank you.
Yes, is the answer to your latter question, but it was part of a broader vision in this country. A radical idea that we have a government that actually just tells the truth to its people. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking? You're 17. You'll be 18 before November? You can vote at the office. And I hope you do. But I think that it's your generation it's our generation in many ways. I grew up into a generation as well where our government has systematically lied to us. For at least a couple of decades, as long as I can remember, about the basis for the 2008 financial crisis bailouts, about the Trump-Russia collusion hoax that never was, about the origin of COVID-19. You're told that it didn't start in a lab and you're censored if you said it, before we now know that it did. About the Hunter Biden laptop story on the eve of the last election, dismissed by 50 intelligence officials in the U.S., dismissing it as Russian disinformation before after the election we learned it was true. The truth about what happened on January 6th, which only came out years later, video footage that wasn't released. The truth of how our own money is being spent in Ukraine. The truth about the Jeffrey Epstein client list, which I do not believe we've received. The truth about the National Transgender Shooter Manifesto, which we were lied to before it was leaked. We the people deserve a government that just tells us the truth again. And the reason people don't trust the government anymore is actually the government doesn't trust the people with the truth. Trust is a two-way relationship. And so I think two things need to happen in this country for us to rebuild trust. In this country, I think one starts with the government, and I'm going to keep my promise on that. We're going to go back. As long as I've been an adult, certainly for this century, where have we lied to the people? The people have a sense that we've lied about matters that are important to the public. Where are we lying right now? And open the kimono and say, here's the truth. I know it's ugly and people before believed that you couldn't handle it, but my conviction is we the people can handle the truth. We the people demand the truth. We require the truth. We got to see it to ever be able to fix it. That's what I'm going to give you on behalf of the government. And even though it's not my personal fault, I'll be the president when I say this, we are sorry to our citizens for betraying your trust for as long as I can remember. And I hope something then happens. I hope members of the media, at least one, steps up and says the same thing, looks their audience in the camera and says, you know what, we played interference for the government. We lied to you about the Trump-Russia collusion hoax, about the COVID origin, about the truth of what really was going on with each of the foreign wars that we've entered on false premises over the course of the last 25 years. Go straight down the list and say, you know what, we weren't honest with you either. Here's what went wrong. Here's how we held the people who lied to you accountable. We're sorry, and here's how we'll ensure that something like that never happens again. Those two things happen, we're well on our way to reuniting this country. I think 80% of us in this country agree on the basic rules of the road. Not what the media tells you, not what social media looks like, but actual citizens. And that's the beauty of this process. Even 2 nights ago, we had protesters at one of our events. We've had protesters barge into multiple of my events throughout this process. My rule of thumb, if it happens right here, as long as it's not cynical, paid-for people, but actual earnest people that have a view to share, we'll give them the mic and make their view known as long as they're able to sit down and be respectful of everybody else. 80% of our country shares the basic values in common, and half the 20% are people younger than me who never learned those ideals in the first place. I think we can bring them along too. That's how we're going to reunite this country, but the first step is we have to know that we're not being systematically lied to, and I'm sorry to say right now we are. And if there's one thing I get done as your next president, it'll be to shut down that deep state and make sure we the people, again, have the truth, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. And so it's my care for the victims there, but it's also my care beyond that for this country to make sure we restore the truth in our government again. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.